Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here too and to have your attention. I will speak about still work in progress, but about my PhD project and the first in-between results. My topic in specific is about lateral entrants in Germany, in the federal state of Saxony. And today I will speak about the entrants or the experiences they made while entering the new profession. So my question is, how do lateral entrants experience their career entry as new teachers? So my research focuses on a collective view on changing frameworks, societal structures, and the change of biographical life courses. So nowadays, people don't just learn a profession and stay with it. Societal changes also happen in professional life, like we can see in Germany, for example, with all the lateral entrants with very different ages. So contemporary society, liberalism, and current events provoke this change and even the reconsideration of what people want to do in professional life. So I do see the research topic from the perspective that the system changes slowly and we have new challenges and need therefore even new perspectives. My qualitative approach and interest lies in looking at biographies, life courses that influence what people do and the maxims they live by. And it is about looking first at singular experiences which are reflected in collective orientations. So I analyze singular experiences, singular biographies, and put them in a big orientation framework, which allows hopefully holistic conclusions to be drawn. Therefore, I would speak very, very briefly, because we have less time, about my first conclusions and the results, and first of all about my basic research interest. Like even Rafaela said before, we still have this shortage in Germany and less but still rising numbers, and the federal state's reaction was this special measure, the so-called Quer- und Seiteneinstieg in Germany, which I translate into lateral entrance as this temporary, which is from my point of view not really temporary because they stay in the system maybe till they get their retirement, and they are called this special measure on federal solution. So this leads me to the first conclusion that the standardized teaching we have in Germany with examiner or bachelor and master degree changes, and the focus lies on teaching in between and out of even more than before. And also looking at very current data from 2020, the decreasing recruitment of other permanent teachers, that's how they're called now in the statistics, with university degrees, shows that it is clear that the trend is not completely disappearing like some people expected or wished for, that they just disappear from the system. From my point of view, they stay in the system. So lateral entrants are being hired less in 2020-21. Nevertheless, thousands of them remain in the public school service and need special support systems like we discussed earlier, and a special assistance. So therefore, I would like just to outline that lateral entrants in Germany can work in between and of course out of field in primary schools in Germany, because their studied profession doesn't fit most of the time exactly to the taught school subjects. For example, in my data, I have 1/3 of the participants of the study who did a bachelor or master degree in economics, for example. So they are part of math, but they don't have the math qualification for teaching, for example. So as we saw already yesterday, the lines are rather blurred and not 100% specific if they teach in, between, or out of field. From my point of view, it's about the understanding of the transition, of the boundaries, of the difficulties they have into this new professional identity. And I see it as an ongoing process into something which could lead to a professionalized identity. Some short words about my database. Now I use 15 problem-centered interviews. They have been narrative and last between 50 minutes and 1.5 hours with teachers who attended a special qualification program for the lateral entrance in Saxony. And for comparison, I interviewed some people from a different federal state to have a wider horizon for my method I'm using. Maybe I can mention that it was not very easy to find a lot of people who were willing to participate. We already had it yesterday. There are a lot of fears to speak about their experiences and about their entering the profession. So I had contact because I gave courses 1.5 years in didactics of math, and so I could gain a little bit their interest. So because of the time, I think I might skip the next slides because I already spoke about this yesterday, and this is very, very specific. I just mentioned that I have a methodological approach connected to the praxeological sociology of knowledge after Ralf Bonsack and Arndt Michael Nohl. And it's a very complex approach, and it is about the reconstruction of social reality, which is produced in different social practices, in action-guided knowledge of the individual actors of this social practice, and is consequently a reflective understanding of action practice. So this could be interesting. The central structure of the documentary method is to reconstruct the incorporated and habitualized practices and existential social contracts related to the Bourdieu's theory of the explanation of habitual differences. This is quite important to mention because at the end, I try to figure out in which stress ratio the interviewees or the orientation figures of the narrations where they lie on the stress ratio between norm and habitus. So while we all communicate on an immanent level, the interest lies in the writer part of this figure, in the space of conjunctive experiences, to understand how people, or in my case, the target group, construct their field of experiences and how they gain their process of understanding. So it's about the construction of social identity as a teacher and the implicit reflection between norm and habitus. So with this background information and the methodology, I found, or I reconstructed, that's how you call it, 3 different types. Maybe I should mention that I used for finding the dimension, I call it approach, I use a theoretical construct after Nentwig Gesemann, who's doing a lot of this kind of research. And I developed a so-called basic type, which opens fictive field in which I can find different reconstructions. So the three types under the roof of approach is the resistant, the analyst, and the independent one. And we still have some time. I will shortly speak about the three types. The resistant one. The first type is the resistant and can be defined as a type whose modus operandi is reconstructed as very stable and resilient in his daily professional habitus. So the collective orientation patterns in the interviews reveal a collective negotiation of existing norms and rules of the schools. Entering the profession shows no barriers, or no barriers are visualized. The person is identified as a teacher and sees and speaks about him or herself as a fully fledged teacher. So a negotiation that one is not yet a fully fledged teacher as other types does not take place in this resistant type. Being a teacher is internalized, incorporated into the practice, and does not trigger any conflicts. So the interviews do not mention conflict situations into they feel uncomfortable or they had difficulties, and they describe the daily situations in which their needs are met all the time. So this person do engage in confrontation with colleagues or the school management. Entry into the school is even constructed as very, very soft without major problems or barriers. And the differences between norm and habitus do not emerge prominently here. Norms of the school are internalized, which is very interesting, and absorbed without conflict and transferred into the practice of action. The second reconstructed type is the analyst, and the analyst tries to deal with problems and difficulties in the beginning of the teaching profession as a lateral entrant. The professional role is not stable all the time in his modus operandi, and uncertainties in methods and didactical implementations are reconstructed in the habitualized practice. So naming these problems, this type can mark difficulties without having immediately proposed solutions in the habitualized professional interaction in the classroom. But they have it in I call it in a theoretical way. That's why I call this type was an analyst. So they are theoretical ideas, but they cannot bring it into action practice. So everyday practice is constructed as something that is not determined by a clear certainty or a constancy in action. And the actors deal less with the institutionalized norm and their habitualized practice, but rather with the social norm of how a teacher should be, or how a teacher should do things. So this shows even the existing norms in which teachers often move, or even gives an idea about the tension between this norm and habitus. At the same time, societal norms of the teaching profession are also very effective. This construct shows that especially lateral entrants do not only deal with existing norms and needed knowledge, but rather the construction of their entered new profession. So however, the collective orientation figure points to the tension where the actors reach limits and problems in the execution of their actions. This is because they do not exactly know what is expected and how they can meet the correct expectations or norms sometimes. But they have a vague analytic approach and know that they need more information. And thereby, exactly these ambiguities are named, partly brought to an individual level, but not further negotiated till now in this tension. The third type The third type has some different typical modus operandi, especially in dealing with hurdles. And problems and tasks that cannot be very clearly assigned. Here, the third type makes concrete attempts to explore its options for action. No? The type, the independent, wants to make variances and is willing to stand up to inevitable confrontations. The professional role is very stable and difficulties can be solved with the right tools. Typically for this type, support systems are gladly accepted and are part of the problem-solving strategy in case uncertainties with methods and didactical implementations occur. Changes are individually identified and are steered in the right or better fitting direction. This type is also characterized as someone who does not conform to some normative structures of the institution, as well as the formal framing of lateral entrant, or what a lateral entrant has to be or has to do. At numerous points, in the interviews, an orientation, and that was even very interesting because it occurred very much, the stubborn working off of formal requirements of the state or the university regarding the content of the qualification measure becomes clear. At this point, the tension between the habitualized practice, the daily experience of what is considered necessary, and the normative programmative specifications became apparent. So organizational conditions are understood here as a non-action action orientation. And that's maybe what I mentioned before, that the special measure or the support strategies have to be tailored, from my point of view, more individually, because they don't bring especially a part of the group of the lateral entrants not to action orientations, and they can't or don't want to transfer them into their actions. The programs contain theoretical foundations that are not needed in practice. So rather, the type seeks structures that guide actions. The self-positioning, as often left alone, strengthens the role of independently taking care of necessities. The type, the independent, is at the same time an active becoming one who does not remain stuck in the status quo, but wants to develop further. So based on the biographical approach, as well as the inclusion of the concept of habitus or incorporated habitus patterns, the methodological theoretical procedure of the research work is founded, and it has shown how lateral entrants incorporate these performative routines of habitualized practice. The aim, or the further goal, is to shed light on an area that is still less researched in order to generate concepts that can be applied to teachers or lateral entrants in Germany, especially to them who teach or who meander between the poles of teaching in and out of field. And yeah, maybe it helps to reconstruct the tension with the educational biographical ruptures. So for the further work in progress, as you can see, as you can see in the figure, I try to establish a multi-dimensional level construct of types to reconstruct from different perspectives the different types, and the dimensions are pulled together step by step whenever orientation figures and their contrast figures are seen. So the figure shows the ongoing work on the development of this typology, including all the single cases, the interviews, or the parts of the interviews, and the several themes as dimensions and the advancement and concentration of these types. And the dimensions are approach, the field, didactical implementations, and I will look at professional implementation and support strategies as well. So I hope we are still in time. Thank you very much. Is it okay? Yep. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, feel free to ask me.